All right. The next deity up in our examination here is the goddess Athena, which, if I have to betray my own personal preferences, probably my favorite deity in the Olympian pantheon. And part of it comes from the fact that she just finds her way into so many different stories. As we'll see, is that one of the functions that she plays in Greek mythology is that she's one of the principal guides or helpers of heroes. She shows up in almost all of the major Greek hero stories, coming alongside them, and perhaps most famously alongside Odysseus. So we'll be seeing a lot and hearing a lot of Athena. So I mean, the fact that she gets lots of stage time, screen time, page time, I think influences that. But she's also just, I think, so fascinating. I mean, she's a feminine goddess, but she dresses in this kind of classical, stereotypical masculine way. I mean, she wears a war helmet, she carries a spear, sometimes she has a shield. She's associated with things like military victory. This is a little Nike statue in her hand here. So she's feminine, she's virginal, she's masculine. She crosses all of these kinds of lines in ways that other deities don't. And so I just find that just so fascinating. Just not just the fact that she's in so many stories, but that her. There's so many aspects to her identity under this Olympian umbrella that really no other god or goddess comes close to. So I want to take a brief look at Athena. Her core identity is, I mean, this is a bit reductive, but it makes it easy to remember the three W's: a goddess of wisdom, a goddess of war, a goddess of weaving. And I mean, these deserve some unpacking. So when we talk about wisdom, or Athena is the goddess of wisdom, it really is a particular kind of wisdom. It's really that cunning, crafty, trickery kind of wisdom that Odysseus embodies, probably best of all, and I think explains why she's so drawn to him in many regards. So, yeah, wisdom, not in just that you have knowledge born of experience. I mean, that's certainly part of it, but it's really kind of in the moment, using your wits kind of wisdom that Athena very much embodies. War, she is in this guise, she's kind of the antithesis of Ares, who we'll look at, who's more strictly the god of war, but he's really more kind of the god of kind of the wildness, the madness, the frenzy of war. If you were a warrior going into battle, and you were doing sacrifices or prayers, you would very likely pray that Ares would look in the other direction. Ares is the horror of war, and Athena is the goddess of kind of steadfastness, courage, honor, heroism in war. This is the goddess that you want leading you out into battle, not Ares, who is again popularly remembered as the god of war. It's all part of this really broad complexity that we'll be investigating throughout this course. And then she also has, so I mean, war, it was kind of a province in antiquity, was the province of men. Weaving, the domestic arts in the household, was the province of women. So she's one of these rare goddesses who is kind of beloved by, attracted by all segments of society. She has one of the most famous birth stories that is out there. Probably, I'm guessing that even if you haven't had a lot of experience with Greek mythology, you may have heard this story. Hesiod tells us that Zeus, after the Theomachy, after the wars with the Titans, Zeus starts to, it seems he starts to make the mistakes that Kronos did. He starts swallowing deities, perhaps that he sees as a rival, and one of them that he swallows is this goddess Metis. And Metis, it's a feminine word. I mean, in the story, she's a goddess, but what Metis is really is that kind of crafty wisdom. We'll be using this word a lot when we start talking about the Odyssey. Metis is the cunning that Odysseus possesses, and so Zeus swallows cunning itself. And the idea seems to be, I mean, there's so many weird kind of odd biologies in these Greek stories. The idea that Metis can't be suppressed. And this combination, when Zeus swallows Metis, it produces a kind of sexual union, you might say. And the combination of that is Athena. And so Athena is born famously from the head of Zeus. In some versions, Hephaestus, the smith god, the blacksmith god, has to split Zeus's head open, and out of the fissure in Zeus's skull springs Athena, fully born, fully armed, at the ready, as you can see here. It's a wonderful, strange, bizarre story, but very, very memorable. Um, She's a fairly easy goddess to recognize in ancient art. She often wears her high plumed helmet. She's very rarely seen without it, carrying a spear and a shield. She also wears what we call the aegis. This is a version of the head of Medusa. I'm guessing too. Some of you may be familiar with that story. Perseus, the Greek hero, is most famous for beheading Medusa, the Gorgon, whose gaze can turn you into stone. And in some versions of that story, Perseus dedicates the head after his adventures are over to Zeus, and then Zeus in turn gives it to his favorite daughter, Athena. And she forever after wears it either on a cloak, as you see it on her shoulders here, or sometimes it's on her shield. And then she will lead her favorites out into battle, so that their enemy has to look right into the face of the Gorgon. And this word aegis too has survived into English as kind of just something that protects, a shield, a buffer between you and that which might threaten you. She also is famously represented by the owl. As we talked with Zeus, many of the Greek gods and goddesses will have a kind of a representative in the animal world. So for Zeus, it's the eagle. For Athena, it's famously the owl. And we still have kind of that cartoonish association between the owl and wisdom. The owl is a wise bird. You see the owl with his glasses and the graduation cap on the that flood the the greeting card aisle every June and such. And so that goes back to Athena. You actually you see that in other cultures as well around the world. If we had some time, we could do some comparative mythology. But the owl also shows up in Hindu imagery as a symbol of being awake, alive, having your spiritual eyes opened, and the like. This, what you're looking at, is actually a coin that the ancient Athenians in the 5th century, the 400s BC, where in ancient Athens was at its cultural and economic height. They minted these wonderful coins, which they called bubos, little owls, and people wanted them because they were of a predictable weight of silver, content of silver, and they were also really nice to look at. People wanted them. You can still find them. You can find them, people selling them of varying qualities on eBay today. In the background, you also see this little branch. That's the branch and leaves and the fruit of the olive tree. And so Zeus was represented by the oak. Athena represented the olive tree, for reasons we'll get to in just a moment here. One of the things that new students of mythology have to get used to, or even old students of mythology have to get used to, is there's such a multiplicity of names and terms that to really master it, you have to get a handle on the main ones. The Greek poets, they loved the multiplicity of terms and names, and the richness that the Greek language allowed them in their own writings and performances. But that can be kind of a headache for those who are new to this stuff. There are so many names to read and to learn. We'll do our best to kind of make this digestible. So over here, I'll have kind of a short list of kind of the most famous, we might call them nicknames, epithets of Athena, that I think are worth your time knowing. But before I do that, here's another vase painting which shows the birth of Athena. And here we have Zeus. He has a thunderbolt in his hand. It tells us that it's Zeus. He looks a little shocked, doesn't he? He's got his wide-eyed there. And here's Hephaestus, the smith god. He's just split Zeus's head open with his axe, and then out pops our little Athena. The most famous nickname of Athena is Pallas. We're not exactly sure what the word means. It probably means something like protector or defender. And there's a theory that way back when, each Greek city-state had its own defender deity. And it's true, many city-states would have kind of a patron deity that would be kind of their main god or goddess that watched over them. Didn't mean that it was the only deity that they worshipped. The ancient Greeks were very much a polytheistic society, but they might have one particular deity that they would worship above all. Like, so for the Athenians, obviously they worshipped Athena. She gave her name to their town, and so the idea is that Pallas may have began as kind of a generic name for a protector or a defender deity, but over time, because of the centrality of Athens and the association of Athens with Athena, that name just simply stuck to her. So when you see the name Pallas show up in Greek mythological stories or stories about ancient Greece, it invariably refers to Athena. The Athenians themselves worshipped her in all of her guises. They worshipped her as a war goddess, a goddess of wisdom, but in particular they celebrated her as the Parthenos. Parthenos in ancient Greek just means a maiden or a virgin, and this is the term that gives its name to the famous temple that still stands on the Athenian Acropolis, the Parthenon. The Parthenon literally means the temple of the virgin, the temple of the maiden, and we'll look at that temple in just a moment. In Homer's Iliad, she shows up as Athena Promachos. Promachos literally means pro, in front of, machos, the battle. So she's the forefighter or the battle leader. She's here fully in her guise as a war deity, leading out her favorites onto the battlefield. She also, Homer emphasizes her eyes as kind of a locus of her wisdom, as a locus of her physical beauty. So Homer will often refer to her as gray-eyed or flashing-eyed Athena. And I think that plays into, I think we still have that notion is that you can look into someone's eyes and we talk about like a spark of intelligence or the absence, a kind of a dead look as kind of an absence of a mind or a soul. The eyes as a window into one's soul or intelligence. I think that's being played upon here. So like I said, Athena looms large in Greek myth because she's so often at the side of heroes, and we'll see her as such with Odysseus, and then certainly at the end of this course when we do our unit on Perseus and Theseus and Jason and Heracles as well. Athena has a role to play in all of those stories in greater and lesser degrees. So she's someone that we just simply know a lot about. Shows up, and she shows up a lot on the page, and so therefore she shows up a lot in art. So we see many sides of her in ancient Greek culture. This is here we see her on a vase painting. There's the helmet once again. This is Heracles, or Hercules as we usually call him these days, and he's wrestling the multi-headed dog of the underworld, Cerberus, who we'll meet soon, as the last of his famous 12 labors. Here is I show this one not just because it's a great work of art. It's a very early work of Greek sculpture. It always just strikes me unintentionally funny. But this is Perseus beheading Medusa, and this is Athena as his helper deity standing nearby, making sure that the job gets done properly and that the hero is safe. But you can see that the Greeks hadn't quite worked out all of the mechanics of sculpture yet and proportion. I mean, Perseus's thighs are disturbingly large, or at least they are to my eye. And most kind of oddly, they all seem to be kind of looking out as if you're kind of someone snapping a photo here. They have these little kind of grins on their face. Even Medusa seems pretty happy about having her head chopped off here. But again, what I'm trying to emphasize is that Athena is right there next to the hero as he performs his central task. Now, the association with Athens, you can't fully understand who Athena was to the ancient Greeks without understanding at least a little bit about her connection to the city of Athens. So the Athenians themselves told a story about how Athena came to be the patron deity of that city. And so these proto-Athenian people were organizing their city, and they gathered up at the top of the Acropolis, which was just a bare rock at this point. Acropolis just simply means high city. And they were trying to decide, okay, who's going to be our principal deity? And long story short, it came down to between a contest between Poseidon, the god of the sea, and the raging storms on the sea and the earthquake, and Athena, the goddess of war, wisdom, and weaving. And so the Athenians requested, or the people who were about to be the Athenians, requested that each deity perform a miracle. So Poseidon slammed his trident, his three-pronged fork, into the rock of the Acropolis, and out spurted a jet of water. In some versions, it's salt water, which was impressive, but not all that useful as a miracle, right? In fact, it's a little bit messy. And so, but that's kind of indicative of Poseidon's personality, kind of wild and dangerous and unpredictable. And Athena's miracle was much more quiet. She caused an olive tree, as you can see in the background here, to grow up right out of the rock. And in most tellings, this is she kind of creates the very first olive tree and gives it as a gift to these people. And the Athenian people recognize now this was a gift that was civilized. You could use the wood to build things, to craft tools and instruments, and of course the olive itself as food, and the oil has all kinds of different uses. In fact, there's thousands upon thousands of olive groves in Greece today. It's still very much, along with tourism, a backbone of their economy, and so they saw this as a gift that could further their own civilization, and so they chose Athena. Athena is often kind of, as I have here, kind of a counterbalance to Poseidon. This is a fairly common thing that you see. So sometimes you'll have some gods that are associated with civilization and human endeavors and invention on the one side, and then you'll have some deities who are associated with nature and the wildness of nature, and they will often, stories will be that kind of pit one against the other. And this is not to say that Athena and Poseidon are enemies, but they represent kind of this tension between civilization on the one hand and the wildness of nature on the other. It's something that shows up in a lot of stories. We'll talk about it in the Odyssey, and it's a really interesting approach to take in interpreting and getting under the skin of particular narratives. So that nature civilization divide, we'll come back to that. Another thing that makes Athena so striking is that we'll be talking more about kind of mythology as religion. Like, what did it mean for these Greeks to worship these deities? And by and large, for the ancient Greek people, their relationship with the gods was a very tense one. And we saw that already in Hesiod, that human beings are kind of an afterthought. Hesiod himself seems to be very cynical about the place of human beings in the grand scheme of things. And so, it seems for a lot of ancient Greeks, the best that you could do was just try to appease these angry gods, or the best that you could hope for, they would look the other way, because you didn't want them looking towards you, because they were unpredictable and dangerous and petty and jealous, and if you please one god, you're going to piss off another god. So it's this constant juggling act. Well, the grand exception to that kind of rule was Athena's relationship with the Athenians. And you really don't see anything like it in any other part of the Greek world. Is that, yes, Athena was the helper of the great heroes. And mythology, you might say, it suggests that you only attract the positive attention of a god if you're this great demigod or this great hero, or if you're as smart and crafty as Odysseus. Well, yes. But there's this, if you get the sense from Athenian monuments, that the way that they saw their Athena was a goddess who really cared for these people, everybody, men, women, children, the rich, the poor. It goes along with that kind of that experiment in democracy that the Athenians undertook about 2,500 years ago. This idea of kind of individual equality, which is such the exception, really. Back then, of course, but really until the 18th century. The 1700s, you don't really see anything else like it, or maybe a little bit in Florence in the Renaissance. But this is so extraordinary that they see the Athenians saw themselves as having this partnership with this goddess. So there's this famous tombstone where we have Athena mourning at the gravestone of the war dead. Not the heroes in the war, not the generals, not the kings, but just your ordinary citizen soldier who died in one of the many wars that Athens was involved in. And she's mourning. She's leaning on her spear. She's sad. And you note the way that Athena is depicted here. You see the helmet and the spear. Okay, that tells us it's Athena. But otherwise, she's dressed not like some queen or princess. She's dressed like an ordinary Athenian woman. And this humanizes her in a way that you rarely see gods and goddesses humanized on this very kind of compassionate level. Now, a little bit about the Acropolis. As kind of an archaeological artifact that will tell us more about how the Athenians saw this goddess. So this is more or less how it looks today. This is an older photograph, but the Acropolis, this high upcropping of rock in the middle of Athens today. You can see kind of the sprawl of modern Athens today. It's a very large city, but it's dominated still by the Parthenon, which has been through the ringer over the centuries. It was built about 2,500 years ago, and it's been abandoned. It's been looted. It was turned into a Christian church. It was an Islamic mosque. It was bombed. It blew up, but yet it still stands. But this is the Parthenon. This famous symbol of Western civilization still stands, and this is where the Athenians worshipped Athena, particularly as the Parthenos, as the maiden deity. Here's a drawing which shows what the Acropolis and its environs may have looked like at its height. This actually shows what it would have looked like during the Roman era. The Romans conquered Greece, and by and large, the Romans were enamored with Greek culture, and so they didn't destroy it or reduce it to rubble as they did many other cultures. But they continued lots of Athenian traditions and saw themselves as kind of the inheritors of Greek culture, and rather than its destroyers. So here you see you would approach the Acropolis just as you do today through what they call the propylaea, these kind of four gates. The first thing you would have seen is this large statue of Athena, the war goddess, and it said that bronze statue that the tip of her spear was polished so that it would glint in the sun, and that the boats coming into the harbor, which is about 3 miles this way, could see the glint on her spear as kind of a welcoming home beacon. Over here, this building called the Erechtheion purported to mark the site of that contest between Athena and Poseidon. You see this little green blob? That's the olive tree. And there's a little courtyard there. There's still an olive tree growing there today that marks the spot where the Athenians believed Athena gave this gift. And then here's the Parthenon over here. In all of its grand classical glory. On the slopes of the hill, you see a couple of theaters. This one has been refurbished today. The Greeks still, modern Athenians still have concerts and plays here. This was actually built by a later Roman wealthy gentleman who lived in Greece and loved Greece and coughed up a lot of money to have this built. Over here is the so-called Theater of Dionysus. This is where drama, theater, at least in the Western sense, was for all intents and purposes born. And so this is where drama began. We'll be talking more about this theater and the origins of tragedy and drama and comedy in a later lecture. Here's a drawing of, again, a zoom in. This statue, this bronze statue, there's that same one that I pointed out, has been sadly lost. Here's a lower angle shot. You can see the Parthenon in a little hint of its colors. If you remember that picture of that drawing of the temple of Zeus at Olympia, that was much more colorful up at the top here. It's almost certainly that the Parthenon itself all too was heavily covered in reds and pinks and blues and such, that of course that's all gone today. Here our artist has just given a little hint of that with these blue, what are called these metope squares here. And then here you have the depiction of that contest between Athena and Poseidon on the temple here. You would think that you'd be forgiven to think that as you approach the Acropolis that this would be the front door of the Parthenon. It's actually not. The front door is over here. As kind of a cosmic rule, Greek temples faced east. This is east, so they face the rising sun. That's a detail you actually find in lots of cultures with their temples. So this is actually the back of the Parthenon over here. Here's what it looks like today. I took this photograph with a group when I went with a group of students, maybe about 10 or so years ago. You can see all the scaffolding. It's always in a constant state of refurbishment. In fact, the Greeks around the year 1980 decided that they were going to very slowly try to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and so they are very slowly rebuilding the Parthenon. You can see this that bright white color there. What they're doing, this is very controversial, less so today. People have kind of gotten used to the idea. But what they've done is they're not going to rebuild it, put a roof on and color it all red and pink. No, they're not doing that. But what they are doing is that where there are gaps in the stone and where the stone is deteriorated enough that it's in danger of collapsing parts of it, they go to the original quarry. We know where they quarried the marble for the Parthenon. You can see the imprints left behind by the artisans, and they go there and they will carve new stone from the same quarries the original marble was taken from, and then they'll carve it so that it fits exactly in the missing gaps. So where they can't find missing pieces that have broken off, fallen off, blasted off, they will kind of put them back together. So the idea is that eventually they'll have kind of the whole basic structure of the Parthenon back in place, and they can remove all this scaffolding. And there's even talk of somebody even opening up for people to walk through it once again. We'll see. Because of the economic crises of the last 10, 15 years, a lot of this work has ground to a halt. And another big issue is you see all the missing sculpture that's up here. And the vast majority of that sculpture is not in Greece. It's actually in London. There was a guy by the name of Lord Elgin who came to Greece in the early 1800s, before Greece was even a country. And he used his money and his influence basically to take the sculpture down, box it up, and took it back to London, where it's been on display in the British Museum there for decades and decades. And so this has been a big bone of contention. The Greeks are, finally getting their act together in terms of preserving their own monuments. They took care of their acid rain problem. This was always the British argument that say, yes, this is, Lord Elgin maybe was a little underhanded in taking away your statuary, but look at you Greeks, you can't even protect your own stuff. Here we have a world-class monument in London. It's free. Anybody can go see it. We're doing the job for you. But as the Greeks have gotten better at this kind of thing, they've been making more noise about we want that statuary back. Give it back to where it belongs. I'm very sympathetic to the Greek argument, but it'll be interesting to see what will happen. One of the most devastating events happened to the Parthenon, as you see by the date here, September 26, 1687. So a little over 300 years ago. For centuries, Greece, Athens was kind of a crossroads of one invading army after another, and it took its toll. And so in this case, it was the Venetians fighting the Ottomans for this territory, and the Ottoman Turks had turned the Parthenon into a gunpowder arsenal. So it had long stopped functioning as a temple or a church or a mosque, and now it was just a kind of a warehouse, as it were. And the Venetians were over on a hill, and they were flinging cannonballs, shooting cannonballs onto the Acropolis, trying to smoke the Turks off the hill. And one of these cannonballs went through the roof and ignited, caused a spark that ignited the gunpowder and basically blew off this whole, and not the whole, but a big chunk of the southern half of the Parthenon. That gap still remains. So today, this is kind of the postcard shot that often people will take of the Parthenon. It's from this nearby hill, and so I took this picture kind of roughly from the location where the Venetians had their bomb squads set up, their artillery squad, and you can see kind of that V-shaped gap in the hill there, or in the column there, and so the cannonball went boom and then blasted out a big part of the Parthenon. But a testament to the builders, the architects, that didn't make the whole thing kind of burn down and collapse. It's astounding. So the idea is that eventually they will quarry all new marble for this and fill in that gap in the roof line and return it to something resembling its former glory. So the whole building itself is a testament to Athena's connections with human civilization. There were all along and around the outside of the Parthenon, there were small little sculptures detailing this famous battle between the Lapiths, a race of early humans, and centaurs, which in Greek mythology are really almost invariably associated with kind of savage wildness, anti-civilization. And the Lapiths, as the humans, as the representative civilizations, defeat the centaurs. And so the whole building, the whole monument, the whole temple is kind of a testament to the victory of civilization over wild nature. And every year they would celebrate Athena in what they called the Pan-Athenaic Festival, Pan-Athenaic, for all of Athens, for all of Athenians. And maybe athletic games and poetry competitions and drama and food and all that stuff, and it would culminate in a procession in which a garment was woven by the women of the town, again kind of mimicking her association with weaving, and this garment was then brought into the Parthenon. And the sources differ. It was either draped on the shoulders of the statue of the goddess herself, or was displayed as kind of a tapestry in the building. But we do know that in the back of the Parthenon, in its central cella, there was a almost 40-foot high statue of Athena, all in her, dressed in her war finery, a Nike goddess on her in her hand, shield at her side. That again is not sad, which has sadly not survived the ages. But we have enough portraits of it and descriptions of it, eyewitness accounts, that we have a good idea of what it looked like and how big it was. Yes, and we even know the name of the man, Pheidias. Same guy that designed that great statue of Zeus in his temple at Olympia, designed this statue of Athena. Again, sadly, both of those statues are lost to history. Now, if you can't make it to Athens, Greece, you might be able to make it to what's called the Athens of the South, which is Nashville, Tennessee. And there's this, in my experience, kind of this little known fact is that Nashville is so often associated, and rightly so, with country music and the like. But it was also had this reputation long before it was associated with country music as an intellectual center. And it was known as the Athens of the South. And they actually there's a park in Nashville. You're looking at it, called Centennial Park, where there is a 1-to-1 replica of the Parthenon. It was built as part of a centennial exposition back in the late 19th century. It took a long time for them to build it, but that was kind of celebrating kind of classical culture, Western civilization, and this was the centerpiece. This 1-to-1 replica of the Parthenon. You can see it's in much better shape than the one in Athens, and all the sculpture is there. You can see there's a little bit of red up there, but they toned down the coloring and to kind of keep it in that kind of monochromatic style that we've kind of gotten used to when we look at these kind of temples. But it really is quite an amazing thing. It's not marble. I think it's made out of cement, much cheaper. And there are parts of it that are even falling apart already. But it really is quite a wondrous thing. And in fact, I've been there a few times and have walked through it. It's amazing, and you really get a much better feel for the building. You can go inside it and around it and on it in ways, of course, that you can't in Greece. So if I had to, if I had to recommend an experience, it would be if you're able to go to Athens, Greece, see the original, and then experience the one in the Tennessee and put them together, you get this really quite wonderful experience of the monument itself. About 30 years ago, they actually put in the Parthenon a full-scale replica of the statue. This is the Nashville Athena here, and there she stands at nighttime. They open up the doors and they shine these spotlights on her. It's quite imposing. The head of a average-sized human being, barely comes up to the top of the platform here. So she looms above this. It must have been an amazing, awesome thing to still look at in antiquity, as it is when you stand inside this central cella in the Nashville one. Over here is a digital recreation of what the cella again may have looked like in the Parthenon. You see from the goddess from a rear view, and you see this weird little naked guy down here to give you a little bit of a scale. Yeah, so if you can't make it to Athens, Greece, make it to the Athens of South in Nashville, and if you're able someday, do both of them. All right, that's enough on Athena. I'll talk to you guys later.